Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AUA and our annual Genocide Memorial or commemorative event. Tonight, we're very pleased to have with us a number of special guests, our distinguished speaker, whom I'll present shortly, and two special guests, Governor and Mrs. Dukakis, who are with us for a few days at AUA. Please join me in giving them a welcome, warm welcome. Tonight, we're going to address an issue that many of us know has been raised a number of times over the past, especially 40 to 50 years, which is genocide recognition and why it's important to call things by their right names. So tonight, that's our theme, and I'd like to start with a short presentation of when the right term actually has been used, even by the United States. And we'll take it from there. Some of you may have seen this press conference by Secretary of State John Kerry a couple of weeks ago. And you can see there's no problem saying the word genocide here. Even mentions that naming these crimes is important. And let's listen to him say it in his own words.
My purpose in appearing before you today is to assert that in my judgment, Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims. But today I say to all our fellow citizens and to the international community, we must recognize what Daesh is doing to its victims. We must hold the perpetrators accountable, and we must find the resources to help those harmed by these atrocities be able to survive on their ancestral land. Naming these crimes is important, but what is essential is to stop them. That will require unity in this country and within the countries directly involved, and the determination to act against genocide, against ethnic cleansing, against the other crimes against humanity must be pronounced among decent people all across the globe. Thank you.
Okay, so as you can see, we believe in the concept that people should speak out, that people need to say the right things. And tonight we're going to talk more about why it's important to say the right things, because so far we haven't heard what we'd hoped to hear. This is presidential candidate Kerry in 2004. As president, I will fight against the denial of the Armenian genocide. We've all seen these before, and he wasn't elected, but since he's been Secretary of State, he has not yet used the word genocide with respect to the Armenian genocide. This is President Barack Obama. The Armenian genocide is not an allegation, a personal opinion, or a point of view, but rather a widely documented fact, supported by an overwhelming body of historical evidence. Okay, we know we're still waiting yet to hear him use the genocide, the G word, and as he says at the bottom, as president, I will recognize the Armenian genocide. Then we have Governor Dukakis from 1990 proclamation. He, in distinction or contradistinction to the others, actually uses the word genocide in his proclamation. It was then that the mass genocide of the Armenian people began, this being the first genocide of the 20th century. We thank Governor Dukakis for his leadership on this issue. And then in 1951, I'm going to jump way back, this is when the term genocide was started in circulation, and it was in connection with a case that was brought to clarify the scope of the Genocide Convention. So the United States government, this was the government of Harry Truman with Secretary of State Dean Acheson and the legal advisor to the State Department, Adrian Fisher, submitted to the International Court of Justice a brief in which they say the following. The practice of genocide has occurred throughout human history. the Roman persecution of Christians, the Turkish massacres of Armenians, the extermination of millions of Jews and Poles by the Nazis are outstanding examples of the crime of genocide. So this is an official statement of the government of the United States submitted to the highest legal body in the world. It has actually been official. Genocide at the international level, especially in international affairs, are quite common. Nevertheless, lies cost lives. And it's important today for us to call things by their right names, as Secretary Kerry said. And for example, there's the lie about Azerbaijan's territorial integrity. This was a lie manufactured in the corridors of power by greed and petty rivalry among the powers that be. First, it is undisputed that the indigenous people of Artsakh are the Armenians, who have lived in that part of the world, of the Armenian highlands, for thousands of years, long before any Turkic tribe made it west of the Caspian Sea. Second, the Armenian population was repressed and misruled by the Soviets for 70 years. Third, it is not possible to turn the clock back and impose the status quo ante, the way it was. Can't recreate Karabakh the way to lead to genocide. As yet mystifyingly, territorial integrity is still part of the discourse, tempting the aggressors to the east and to the west with the mirage that there are grounds to undo Artsakh's de facto independence by violence and military force. It makes you wonder, when will the madness end? The only option for peace and stability in the region is de jure recognition of the de facto peace. Only when sanity prevails will things quiet down. Genocides do not just happen. They are engineered in the corridors of power. Armenian lives matter, and Armenians have the right to protect themselves from becoming collateral damage to mindless politics again. Actually, the madness should have ended long ago. In 1918, after World War I, the indifferent, selfish, distracted powers that be made a fatal mistake by failing to deal with the Armenian genocide in a timely manner. And everyone, including themselves, has been paying for it since. Is there a way forward? I think so. As Pope Francis said a year ago, the Armenian genocide is an open wound, not just for the Armenians, but for humanity. The Armenian genocide is already irreversibly recognized by the better part of the civilized world. Even today, more than denial, the threat to global security is impunity for genocide. Recognition without reparations poses a catastrophic moral hazard. If perpetrators can get away with murder with a slap on the wrist 100 years later, then the norm is that genocide pays. Denial and getting away with murder are particularly corrosive forms of human hubris. It took Great Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Turkey, Austria, the US and Israel and others to create the Armenian genocide predicament. It will take a community effort to fix it. Armenians should do their part, of course, to help the community find a solution. But a solution is not solely in Armenia's hands. Impunity for genocide, like terrorism and global warming, are global issues that should and do concern Armenia like any other responsible member of the community. Armenia will be harmed, sometimes disproportionately, by these global threats. But Armenia did not create them, nor can it fix them alone. Nor is the Armenian genocide a private bilateral matter between Armenians and Turks or Armenia and Turkey. Victims and perpetrators cannot agree to make crimes go away. Even with recognition, genocidal tendencies do not subside quickly. There may be institutional hand-wringing and some lip service, but these diseases of the human soul often go latent, as they have in the US and Europe, until they rear their ugly heads periodically, stirred by baser human urges like racism and xenophobia. In these circumstances, justice is always partial and often unsatisfactory. Perhaps humanity's genocidal tendencies cannot be cured, they can only be managed. If so, deterrence, self-reliance, and vigilance seem to be the best path forward. Wrongs not timely corrected do not go away. they compound. There is no escape from the downward spiral of dehumanization other than to end the world's addiction to covering up horrific wrongs, its penchant for engaging in quid pro quo politics, and its self-indulgent habit of living at the expense of victims of crime and injustice. This addiction condemns us all, perpetrators, victims, beneficiaries, and bystanders, to be hostages of the past. It is time to give perpetrators and beneficiaries another opportunity to mend their ways, to rectify injuries, to atone for wrongs, and to restore balance to a world that is spinning out of control. Calling things by their right name is a first step toward creating such opportunities for restoring humanity to health and sanity. So that's our topic for today, and I'm now going to introduce our speaker who has got a great deal of experience in this field. Prosecutor Nicholas Koumjian of the Extraordinary Chambers of the Courts of Cambodia is in charge of hearing human rights violations, including charges of genocide in Cambodia. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Koumjian was Senior Appeals Counsel for the prosecution of the former President of Liberia, Charles Taylor, at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. He was involved in a case involving Darfur at the International Criminal Court and assisted victims from the Ivory Coast on a pro bono basis. He was previously principal trial attorney for the trial of Charles Taylor, headed the UN-funded Serious Crimes Unit in East Timor, and was a trial attorney at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the State Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Before entering the international arena, Mr. Koumjian worked as prosecutor in Los Angeles for 20 years. Mr. Koumjian is well known to the AUA community. He has been a visiting lecturer at our LLM program over the past several years. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium. Questions? What? Go ahead. I'm just going to get this off, and you can
just give introductory remarks.
Okay. There's yours.
Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming and for inviting me here. I think the idea of this, as I understood it, is to have a dialogue with you and to go back and forth, and Tom may moderate the questions to make sure that it's productive discussion for all of us. I'll just make some brief introductory remarks. First, about what genocide is, because it certainly is important to call things by their correct name. It's also very important to understand what a name means, what a term means. And the word genocide legally is very technical. The definition that's been used in all of the international courts comes from the Convention Against Genocide. And what that convention does is it requires all states to take measures to punish or prevent crimes of genocide, which are defined as certain acts, 5 categories of acts: killing members of a group, creating conditions of life that could destroy the group, inflicting severe physical or mental harm on members of the group, preventing births in a group, or transferring children from a group. Any of these 5 types of acts committed with the intent, the intent is the key part of genocide, committed with the intent to destroy that group as such, in whole or in part. And the group has to be a national, religious, ethnic, or religious group, or racial group, national, religious, ethnic, or racial group. So these are the definitions of what genocide is. The crime of genocide requires the proof of this specific intent. Many, many serious crimes can occur that don't amount to genocide, but still deserve special recognition for what's happened. And let me explain a little bit about what's going on in the case currently in the courts of Cambodia that we're trying there. In that case, during the Khmer Rouge regime, which ruled Cambodia from 1975 until 1979 for 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days, most experts believe that between 1 and 2 million people lost their lives during that regime. Most of those were targeted because the regime felt that they were a political threat, that they were a threat to the regime maintaining its power and implementing its policies. So people were targeted because of their class, because of their prior association with the former regime, or for simply paranoid reasons when the regime began to suspect even all those among its own cadre as being disloyal. So the vast majority of those killed were of the Khmer nationality, the predominant nationality in Cambodia. However, in our case, we're trying all of those killings, those murders, but we also have 2 genocide charges involving 2 minority groups that were in Cambodia. One, the Vietnamese minority, and secondly, the Cham Muslim minority in Cambodia. So the evidence that we have is that, in particular, the regime intended to destroy these groups. What's the difference between what they did to the Khmer people and they did to the Cambodian, to the Cham and the Vietnamese people, is that the majority of the victims were not targeted because of their ethnicity, because of their being part of a national or racial or religious group. So the most serious crime in our case, actually, is the extermination of the Khmer people, just by the numbers of those that were killed. But still, it's very, very important to these minority groups that the crimes against them be recognized. And I think this is what Senator Kerry was talking about, and I think that's what the subject of this discussion is. It's very critical that people understand what happened. The label, the term is important, but it's also important to know the entire history to understand what occurred. I think I'd really like to get some of your questions to try to address what it is that you're concerned with. Sure.
Why don't you take the microphone so that it'll be picked up?
Characterization of genocide be appreciated. I find often in public discourse that that's lacking. So the immediate question that came to my mind in the Cambodian case is how much genocide applies if the intent there was to get rid of a political group and not an ethnic group, the majority group. And is it the case that it is genocide that's being tried, or is there some other massacres or gross violations?
For the majority of the people that died, the charges that cover the crimes against them is exterminations. This is a crime against humanity. So one of the important things that I think the world needs to recognize is that, of course, it's very critical to go after, to try to prevent genocides. It's also, there are other very, very serious crimes that also need to be addressed by the international community. And part of this is, I think, for those who attended the earlier talk by Governor Dukakis, what he was saying, which I agree with, is the importance of building up international institutions to deal with these conflicts for what's happening around the world and human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The idea of crimes against humanity, that very term, comes from, it actually originally came from the events of 1915, where people talked about the fact that these were crimes that required the attention of all of humanity. They didn't just affect an individual people. The whole world's affected when victims are targeted, when mass crimes are committed against a people. So it's important that all of these be addressed. So in the case of Cambodia, very quickly, while the majority of the crimes are exterminations against these two ethnic groups, we also have counts of genocide.
Hi, my name is Gabriel, and thank you for your talk. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what do you see as the future of international criminal law and prosecution? I know the Extraordinary Chamber has been criticized a lot, and so do you see having these special courts as a likely thing to continue, or is it really all the ways going to be on the ICC from now until the short and medium term?
Well, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, is going to have limits to what it can do. First of all, it's a very idealistic project, which I fully support, but it's very, very difficult to try cases from around the world. They're currently dealing with, I believe, 7 or 8 situations that are under active investigation or cases being tried. From Europe, most of them happened in Africa. Most of them, the court has issues of security when they investigate. It's been very slow. It's been very expensive. I think to date there are 4 convictions of individuals to date since 2002. So there still is going to be a need for regional tribunals and other mechanisms that people have to think about how to address crimes. Many people have talked about some type of, different proposals have been put forward about how to deal with Syria, for example, because there's many think it's unlikely that it would go to the International Criminal Court. Of course, one of the things about the International Criminal Court is that it's also limited by, its jurisdiction is limited to those states that have signed the treaty, that the crimes have to either have occurred in the territory of a state that signed the treaty or be committed by the nationals of a state that signed the treaty. The exception being that the statute of the court allows the Security Council to then refer a situation to the court. And that's already been done in 2 instances. It was done for Darfur, and this is at a time when the United States was quite actively opposing the court, but in that situation, partly I think most people would say a lot of that had to do because the United States had labeled what was happening in Darfur a genocide. Colin Powell used that word, genocide, for Darfur. And in that situation, the United States apparently felt that it could not stand by and do nothing, and it allowed the court to be, the situation to be referred to the International Criminal Court. Of course, that referral has yet to have much concrete result, because the government of Sudan and many of its allies have not cooperated. Arrest warrants have been issued, but no one has been arrested, including an arrest warrant against the president of Sudan. So I do think that, there are situations where many countries are going to want to maintain some contact with what's going on, or even control over what's going on. And there is a future for mixed tribunals, such as in Cambodia, where we have a mix of international judges and national judges.
I'm Samuel Garibian, AUA LLM first-year student. Thank you very much for your lecture and your approach. During 4-day war earlier this month, a lot of horrific crimes have been committed by Azerbaijani forces. Mutilation of corpses, beheadings and torturing. These crimes will be brought to the attention of international human rights tribunals and my question is, what do you think, based on your experience, are the effective legal ways to speed up the process of rendering the judgment? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, definitely, if one of the points you raised, the speed of international justice has been much criticized, and I'm one of those that certainly recognizes it needs to improve. The issue with any conflict, such as in the Karabakh conflict, is what court would have jurisdiction. In the International Criminal Court would not currently have jurisdiction because Azerbaijan is not a member of the court. And they would not have to refer crimes on their territory committed by their nationals. The court would not have jurisdiction over those at the current time, absent a referral by the Security Council. But in many conflicts also there's the possibility of, certainly we've seen the importance of people bringing crimes to the world's attention. So you see in Syria, for example, groups have been created and a lot of money, a lot of effort has been put into documenting crimes by all sides in the Syrian conflict, in preparation that one day there would be some system of justice to address those crimes. So that's something that could occur in any conflict, that people can try to document and preserve the proof of crimes that did occur for some eventual justice. And also, frankly, because it gets attention in the world if you can document what happened. And most important of all is that hopefully the future crimes will be prevented, that people on all sides of the conflict will realize it's not in their interest to commit crimes and will avoid doing that.
Thank you, Nick. Are there other questions? I'd just like to acknowledge our students who are engaging in a kind of commentary, silent commentary, but commentary. Thank you all. And I'd like to ask our special guests, the Dukakis, if they'd like to say something at this point, or anything you'd like to say. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think I have. Anyway, think about it. Yes? Yeah, okay. I know you're quick on your feet. Okay. Please.
Hi, my name's Alex, and I had a quick question. Do you think there's an unofficial time limit in regards to official genocide recognition when it comes to things like reparations? Because it has been 100 years, and sometimes people might say the punishment doesn't match the crime just because it's been committed by another regime or another 3 generations old Turkish population. And I was wondering if this goes on unrecognized officially for another 50 years or so, is there even any possibility of something like reparations coming towards the Armenian population?
I mean, there hasn't been much in the way of reparations for genocide. There's been a case at the International Court of Justice involving Bosnia versus Serbia, for example. In that case, the court found that Serbia had not committed genocide but had been complicit in failing to prevent what happened at Srebrenica or failing to punish the perpetrators. But, and I think this disappointed me a lot, they ordered there was no remedy to it at all. They simply made that pronouncement. There are no reparations or no further orders. So I think the answer is, I don't really know the answer to your question. But, obviously it's important, as long as it's important to people, it's important to have correct history recognized. I'm an American. What if in the United States people would say, we never committed slavery. We don't want to admit we committed slavery. Slavery didn't happen in the United States. Would the United States in any way be a better or stronger country for that? No. Obviously, it would be a tremendous insult against African Americans who suffered from slavery or their great-grandparents, their ancestors did. And also, it would demean the rest of the United States, the other Americans, because you demean your own humanity if you fail to recognize the truth of what happened.
Other questions?
At the beginning of our presentation, we saw that Secretary of State John Kerry called the act perpetrated by the Daesh as genocide. But all of us know that according to the Convention, genocide is acts, crimes committed, perpetrated by the state. And within this context, I wonder, do you find that G word is the right word to call the acts committed by ISIS or Daesh, which is terroristic organization? Because yesterday House of Lords also adopted a resolution calling these acts as genocide, but do you find that it is the right word to call these kind of actions, these kind of crimes as genocide? And is it a dangerous tendency to call all the international crimes as genocide? Thank you.
Well, certainly not all international crimes are genocide, and one of the points I wanted to make is that crimes can be extremely serious and certainly merit the attention of the international community without being genocide. But I don't agree with the premise that it has to be the state. There's nothing in the convention that requires that genocide has to be committed by a state. And in fact, the international courts that have actually dealt with criminal cases of genocide are looking at individuals. And they're looking at whether individuals had the intent. You have to prove that that individual on trial had the intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. I think another thing that wasn't shown, but in John Kerry's speech that he did say, is that we recognize that eventually this will be for prosecutors, judges, especially judges, to eventually decide. And it will, if you're talking about cases against individuals, that would depend upon the facts involving that individual and what that individual's intent was. But there's nothing that requires that it be a state. So a group, individuals in a group that commit these crimes, such as killings, with the intent to destroy a national, racial, religious, or ethnic group, in whole or in part, they're committing genocide. And in my view also, if you give people a choice that's an illegal choice, that basically saying, if you don't give up your religion, then we're going to kill you. You have a choice of converting or giving up your religion or being killed. That's genocide, because a religious group, the intent is whether you have, the question is whether you have the intent to destroy the religious group as such. If you prevent people from practicing their religion, there no longer will be a religion. So I think that it is appropriate in these circumstances, if the facts bear it out, to label that a genocide.
Other questions?
I want to thank you for coming here today. I just want to touch upon the topic of media, because I'm the representative of the generation who has been actively involved in social media and media in general. So lately, just very recently, we have learned that in Wall Street Journal there has been this huge ad on that took the whole page of the journal about the denial of Armenian genocide. And there's this huge ad in New York that is also denying the Armenian genocide. But we also know that the diaspora, Armenian diaspora community, tries to maintain the status of the truth by also having these huge posters in New York and in billboards. So I'm just wondering, do you think there is any way of preventing, like actually finding out how, a way to make the truth value be worth more than money? Because that's what Wall Street Journal or any other Billboard or any other huge organization is doing now. Whoever pays more gets more, and that's how truth gets to be the victim. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you know, there are various schools of thought about genocide denial, and there's various approaches. So in Germany, and perhaps this is right for the particular history of Germany, genocide denial is a crime. In my view, it's probably because of my American background. I think that I value very much the right of free speech and free debate. And I think the best way to attack falsehoods is not by criminalizing them, but it's by showing the truth, by making people aware of the actual facts. I do believe in the free marketplace of ideas, the truth will win out. The majority of people will understand what is the truth. And so some very unsophisticated or attempts at denial or to change the truth, I think, can be easily countered.
Other questions? Before you do, isn't there also a value to closure and finality of determinations of this sort? There are certain things, once someone has been judged, I don't know, a murderer, after that, debating about whether the person actually committed the murder could continue, of course, in some sense, but there's finality for the victim, there's finality for society on that issue, right? Where's the finality for this particular situation, the Armenian genocide predicament? Is there finality, or is it going to be a continuous, another 100 years of discussion? That's I think the hard part. Yeah.
I actually have two questions. The first one is going back to the last point you mentioned about freedom of speech and expression and the right to do so. I guess my question is, what is your evaluation and take on the verdict that the European Court passed on the Switzerland versus Princhek case last year? And my second question was pertaining to the issue of genocide versus other categories of crimes. And I know in the academic circles, people have devised and developed terms such as politicide, which are not necessarily legal terms. And how do you, and in the case of Cambodia, maybe so in the Syrian case today, politicide is the actual crime, which is not necessarily a legal term, that is taking place in Syria today. Do you think there's a chance that actions that pertain to political crimes that deal with mass-scale extermination can have a potential to be integrated into the legal system of criminal acts?
Okay. Yeah. First, I think on your second point, whether or not the people being killed are being killed because of their religion, because of their ethnicity, or because of their politics, doesn't really matter to those being killed, and I don't think should really matter to the international community and the development of this principle that is, I think, a goal of the international community, the right to responsibility to protect. If mass crimes are occurring, there's a responsibility to protect, and that would include when it's a political group, or if it doesn't fit technically the definition of genocide, if it's simply an extermination as a crime against humanity. That's a huge crime, exterminations as a crime against humanity. So I think, I also don't object to people using the word genocide in a non-legal sense to cover those kinds of situations. Many people talk about Cambodia as the auto-genocide, a group killing its own people. And, that's fine as long as it's not a technical legal term, but I understand it, and I think it may convey to others the seriousness of what occurred. And then your first question was about, on the Switzerland case. I haven't actually studied the opinion. I haven't read the opinion. I did hear some of the arguments of Amal Clooney. I remember I watched that. And as I understand it, the principle that she was objecting to on behalf of the Republic of Armenia was not so much on this issue of whether or not speech should be criminalized, or denial even should be criminalized, but the findings of the lower court, which seem to deny facts that should not have been denied in a court of law. So I think that was, but I can't comment further because I haven't really studied the judgment. I have to do that one day.
Did I say 2 words about
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Since I have studied it. First of all, 7 out of the 17 judges actually found as a matter of fact, they took judicial notice of the Armenian genocide as a fact. So that's very important. 2 more votes and it would have been the law of the European Court. So it was a missed opportunity and a politicized court. Number 2, they found for Switzerland that Switzerland actually does have the right to regulate speech in this way. Although I, as an American, like Nicholas and like a lot of others, don't like the notion of criminalizing speech. They said that it's possible in the protection of the public order and for the welfare of the community to criminalize certain kinds of provocative speech that's meant to hurt other people, because words can hurt people. Those are very, very important principles. So, and then the most important thing is that they overturned the lower court ruling, which actually went way beyond where it needed to go on the issue of that affects Armenian interests with respect to genocide. So overall, a win for Armenia and a loss for the world. But next time, I think if they ever reach this issue again, and they may, I think the European Court will probably take judicial notice of the Armenian genocide and begin to give some closure to the issue. Because there's no other way to get closure. This open debate can continue forever because it's an open-end process in the court of public opinion. So it's just a matter of how much money you have to put. They wrote things in the sky. They did skywriters lately. Genocide against the Armenian genocide. It's absolutely nutty.
Mr. Koumjian, thanks for your interesting lecture. I'd like to go back to the issue of the conflict concerning the Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan issue. You stated that there are several ways on how to trigger the jurisdiction of ICC. So one is the state referral by a state member of ICC, Rome Statute. The second is the initiation by the ICC prosecutor, which is called proprio motu. And the third one you called an exception, which is referred by the UN Security Council. But I know that there are some limitations in this case too. So there should be a threat to the international peace and security, and only then the UN Security Council can refer the case, and only concerning the countries who are UN members. So those that are not UN members, even in this case, the case cannot be referred. Well, not the case, the situation. So now Azerbaijan is a UN member, though it's not a member to ICC. And there is a threat, an actual threat to international peace and security, because if the war starts again, Armenia can be involved. I don't say it will, but can. Turkey can, and other countries too. Why not? So in this case, why doesn't the UN Security Council refer this case to ICC? Because it is a real threat to the international peace and security. I'd like to know your approach concerning this issue. Thank you.
Well, the Security Council definitely has the power to refer the case, a situation like that, in this particular case, to the ICC. And thank you for your clarifications on some of these referral issues. On one of the points, although, on jurisdiction, if a state is not a member, then another state cannot refer that case. You know, the ICC prosecutor also cannot initiate an investigation on his own in territory of a non-state party, nor can another state party refer a situation from a non-state party territory. So there are limits on the jurisdiction. The only way to get jurisdiction over crimes committed in the territory of a non-state party would be a referral by the Security Council.
Other questions? These are quite technical questions about law and the difference between process and substantive law. We have a lot of substantive and moral law in our favor, but the process side is weak.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very informative. Just as it's widely known, Azerbaijani government tries to agitate that we have committed a genocide in Khojalu. So without being prone to believe whatever they are agitating, I think that we all need to know the truth in reality, what happened in Khojalu, in order to be able to effectively respond and counter-argue to the statements of even ordinary Azerbaijanis if it happens in third countries. And my second question is the ethnic cleansing in Baku and Sumgait. Can it be qualified as a genocide in accordance with the respective convention? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think, and I'm not going to comment on a specific cases, but I think what you are talking about raises the issue, which is very important, is that any time you want to refer a case to the court, to the International Criminal Court, they're going to look at both sides. You cannot simply refer your opponents or your enemies. The court is going to look at crimes committed by all sides. And of course, all of those of us who favor international justice, we also have to be willing to put ourselves or our forces or troops to the same test, to the same standards. This is part of the criticism of some of the big powers, is that they support these cases, but only when it applies to someone else. It is necessary in the end for all states to compromise their sovereignty somewhat and make themselves available for the same process that's not treated differently depending upon which group is involved.
Thank you. So I have a very, very short question, and it is, can there be an excuse for committing a genocide, such as our students said, territorial integrity? Please.
There's no excuse for killings. I mean, or a genocide. There's of course, in the international law, there's the possibility for an individual killing of the defense of necessity, but I think to answer your question, that would be ridiculous in the case of a genocide. So I think that you were making a point, but I got your point.
I thought you had a question.
I've already asked a question, so one more. Echoing what Tom Sambadan has been talking about, we discussed the Armenian genocide issue over and over again in public. Finally, are there international legal avenues that could somehow meaningfully address the issue today?
That's a very difficult question, and to be honest, I don't have an answer as far as an international jurisdiction. There are many different approaches that could be taken. For example, there's issues of returns of property that would probably be domestic. But it's a very complex topic, and I don't really feel qualified right now to address it.
Hi, Gabriel again. I actually would like it if you could elaborate on one of your previous answers. So regarding the current, there's the current conflict, and you suggested that, activist students, whomever here, lawyers and non-lawyers, should collect evidence and store it, and that could be useful both for advocacy purposes and for future potential prosecution. So I'm actually thinking of your example. So right now, the Cambodian court, ECCC, is looking at crimes that committed decades ago. And so what types of evidence have you seen from your experience that have been effective and useful to try and bring these cases to court now, that you can actually use in court now? And so what should people be collecting and preserving now to make that happen? And are there any international resources to help Armenians that would be interested in doing that, that they could tap into?
There was a huge project in Cambodia that went on before the court was set up. It was originally run out of Yale University in the United States. I think it received some money from the United States government and I believe from other sources. It's still there. It's called DC-CAM, the Documentation Center of Cambodia. We use in our cases much evidence that they collected. The transcripts of interviews. They've done many, many thousands of interviews. Documents that they collected and preserved from the Khmer Rouge period, including, for example, things you've probably seen, these photographs from the torture center, the execution center of Tulslang, the school in the center of Phnom Penh, where over 13,000 people were tortured and killed, and the confessions that were written out at that center, all the paperwork that was collected from that center when the Khmer Rouge fled in great haste when the Vietnamese were coming. All of that has been of tremendous importance. It was used, I'm sure, today in court. The trial's going on, and we're actually discussing S-21 currently. So, that can happen. It's also ongoing for Syria. There are several groups that are collecting, documenting information. I think that can also, sometimes it's an advantage if it's an outside group because then there's not the allegations of bias in what they're doing. Theoretically, an outside group could collect documents from all sides of what's going on in the conflict and try to document it. It requires resources. I don't know who would donate money for that.
Actually, tomorrow we're going to have Human Rights Watch here, right? Arya Nair, who is the co-founder of Human Rights Watch, and those of you that are interested in this issue should raise that because one of the big things they do is document these types of situations.
Human Rights Watch does some tremendous work, and very, very brave and competent people around the world. And it's amazing when you go in later and really we spend millions of dollars investigating and interviewing witnesses and collecting documents, and you look back on reports they wrote during the conflict, how pretty close to they were pretty accurate when it was just one person with their sources that they had about what was going on at the time.
That's tomorrow from 4 to 6. We have lots of events coming up.
Another question, I guess. I guess I want to take your evaluation of the situation with Omar Bashir and the recent developments, especially in the last year or so, how a convicted felon has been essentially reintegrated within the regional community and has emerged as a part of the Saudi-led coalition that is waging a war against Yemen, which also involves direct U.S. and U.K. assistance. How, when the international community, or at least human rights activists, witness such a profound violation of, first of all, law and also morality, what is left for human rights activists around the world in terms of motivation to keep doing the job that they're doing?
Well, definitely the situation in Darfur and with the arrest warrant of the president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, has been a tremendous defeat. I think it's an embarrassment for the international justice. It's a setback. He hasn't been convicted, but the prosecutor has alleged that he committed genocide. Judges have signed an arrest warrant then saying, and they have to make a determination that the evidence reaches a certain level in order to do that, and that there's sufficient evidence for an arrest warrant to be issued. And yet, the international community hasn't been able to enforce the arrest warrant. And no one from Sudan has been tried, except for actually a couple of the rebels who were also accused of attacking peacekeepers of war crimes, voluntarily surrendered. Actually, I represented one of them in The Hague. They voluntarily went to the court to face the charges. But what I say, Should we give up? I don't think so. I mean, the world is changing. It's changing slowly, but quite dramatically. Before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was set up in '92 and Rwanda in '93, people didn't really think about international courts judging crimes of war and what was going on in war. The only example we had was Nuremberg, which was after the big defeat and the victors trying those that they defeated. The situation now has changed, and certainly there are limits on international justice, and there are many injustices and many cases of people enjoying impunity around the world. But we see that immediately when a conflict happens, people are talking about justice and talking about accountability. We've seen in this room already, that people are talking about justice for events that happened just a few years ago, or a few weeks ago, investigations and possible trials. So the world has changed, and I think that's for the better. I think that probably some crimes are even being prevented because of that, because individual commanders may fear that they would eventually be arrested, and because I think governments involved in conflicts also see the very negative public relations that they suffer when their forces commit crimes.
I would like to know how there is a way to make that politics don't interfere with the justice, because these international justice systems are politicized, because they often they often take to trial to the people who are politically engaged in some ways. For example, they want to punish him because he did something not very pleasant to the persons who took them to the court. So I would like, is there a way to know, is there a way or a mechanism to prevent politics from justice? Because I think it hinders the main essence of and notion of justice, because sometimes it is being politically biased. Thank you.
Well, certainly that's the goal, but it's a very difficult project to eliminate politics from justice, and particularly when we're talking about international crimes, when we're talking about things like wars that go on between countries. It's something I think we have to work at. Perhaps one way that it could be approached in the future is looking at how judges are selected, because for the international courts, judges are generally nominated by countries and then elected by countries, and perhaps there may be another way to make those nominations and elections less political, so people would have a little more confidence. Because what you want, the goal, and it's very difficult, is to have people believe that politics plays no role in cases, and that the cases are decided simply upon the merits of the truth and the law. And I can tell you that really is what we try to do, and I think in most cases it's achieved, but it's a difficult process.
Last question. Okay. Sorry for my persistence. Just I'm keen to know what really happened in Khojalu. So if you have researched this topic, please illuminate us, because we haven't covered it in our schools, at least when I was a school pupil, and the information in the internet is very ambiguous. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't investigated Khojalu, so one of the important things is, of course, any lawyer, especially a prosecutor, shouldn't really talk about things until you've actually looked at the facts and done the interviews, really looked at all of the facts. So whenever there's an allegation, I think it's very important that there be an in-depth investigation and that everyone can benefit by that.
Okay, we've had quite a lively discussion, covered a lot of ground. I'd like to thank our speaker this evening, Prosecutor Nicholas Koumjian, and our special guests for being here. And thank you all for your contributions and your discussion. And thanks also to the students for raising our awareness of some issues. Bye.